Hello, I hope everybody can hear me. There's nothing like being punctual. I make it bang on 12:30. Actually, it's just flipped over to 12:31, but hopefully everyone can hear me okay. It's always a little bit strange when you do these things because you actually mute everybody and then you end up talking to yourself for about 45 minutes, which is a pastime of mine. So, first of all, thank you for giving up your time to come along to see this presentation. Hopefully, I mean, we can see, I don't know if it shows on your screen, but it shows there are 18 slides with this. They're not particularly heavy. We just want to get across the major points that are influenced or affected by Brexit and make sure that you're aware of them and what we can do to help to mitigate those issues. So, if everybody's ready, but one thing I want to say is we are recording this. I don't think that's particularly bad, but if you put any comments or anything like that, I'm not sure whether that shows up on record. So just be aware that you are being recorded. We will send you a link to the recording of this after the event. So that's, you can hear me witter on again for another hour, which is nice for you. And if there are any comments that you have, please use the chat section. And we'll try and pick up those comments as we go. The chat section is will appear on the right hand side, and just ask away. I mean, hopefully there's no questions yet. Hopefully everybody can hear. I might just unmute you for a second because otherwise I really am in no man's land. Let me just unmute somebody, for example. Ender.
You can't see anything, Eugene.
You can't see anything on the screen.
I just see a cartoon of a microphone.
That's what you should be. That's what you should be seeing.
Looks like it's.
That's okay. That's what you should be seeing. Good. That's working. You're all right. That's your welcome screen, Eugene.
Working here as well, Rob.
Okay.
Okay. So that's just telling you that we'd like you to mute, that you can, and that everything's going to be recorded and sent to you. So I'm going to mute you all now so that you don't, and I'll unmute you as we go through, but it allows me to go through my process. So let's talk about Brexit, my number one subject. First of all, we know that Brexit, and from the UK government's point of view, Brexit is done. We have left the EU. We are now in the process of negotiating the future relationship with the EU. Brexit is parked, it's finished. We now have this transition period between now and the end of the year where we negotiate with the EU for the future relationship. There is a possibility to extend that transition period by up to 2 years. There is only one possibility to extend the transition period. Once it's been extended, it can't be extended again, but you can extend for 1 or 2 years. That extension must be requested by the 30th of June 2020, i.e. in about 3 weeks' time. It's also worth noting that that extension needs to be agreed. It's not a pre-packed option where the UK are just saying, look, we're in trouble, we need one of those. This has to be negotiated, including the financial settlement of it, and then shared with the 27 member states. So really the point now really is that if we were to go down the extension to the transition period, we would already be negotiating it, and so would the EU with the other member states. So yeah, within about the next 10 days, there's probably no opportunity for an extension in any case. Equally, from the UK's point of view, and particularly Boris's bullish point of view, is that there is no extension to the transition period. The Conservative Party was elected on a manifesto that said that they would not extend what they called then the implementation period, but they mean the same thing. So as far as the UK is concerned, we leave the EU formally at the end of this year. So if any part of your strategy for Brexit planning is, let's hope it gets extended, don't make that your strategy. It's not a good one, and you really are risking everything. So let's walk through what we know. So if we have Brexit at the end of the year, I mean, what do we know now? What are the facts that we know? First of all, there are 150,000 traders where this is new to them. Customs processes are completely new to them. They've never come across them before, and this is new territory. We've also gone from quite a dangerous situation, and I'm not accusing anybody in the audience here, but where we went from a situation where there was no knowledge at all to there being a little bit of knowledge. And that can in some ways be quite terrifying, because when you don't have any knowledge at all and you gain some of it, you don't know if you've gained enough of it, and you may be sitting back thinking that you have. I had literally this morning, I had a phone call with a major shipper who told me that he's ready for Brexit because he's got TSP, which was the transitional simplified procedure, which I pointed out to him was cancelled in February. And his world fell apart, basically. So now we're helping him out. But it's that kind of level that worries me, that some people think they're ready and they're not ready. And that's why we become quite popular in this situation. So there's 150,000 traders where this is completely new. And they're just in the UK. That doesn't include the ones in Ireland and the ones in mainland Europe. Brexit will generate 200 million additional customs declarations in the UK alone. That's worth knowing that the start figure was 50 million. So it's a sizable increase in the number of transactions that will be generated. It's not going to 200 million. It will end up being 250 million. So there's the 200 million new declarations. This is why there's quite often the shortage of customs agents and customs brokers who are willing to service that market, because it's enormous. Our planning has us handling just over 2 million declarations a year, which is a stunningly high number, but is 1% of the market. So even at that situation, we're not fighting for over business. There's so much out there. Paperwork is coming. Don't get to the situation where you think the paperwork isn't coming, even if there is some kind of agreement between the UK and the EU. It will always involve paperwork. The only customs union involves paperwork. Free trade agreement involves paperwork. The only way you don't have paperwork is if you have the single market, and the single market is full EU membership, and clearly that is no longer an option. The other thing we've always said from day one really is that the difference between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit is the start date, because the paperwork was always going to come about anyway, and no matter how hard or soft it is, we've often referred to it as an egg is an egg, whether it's soft or hard boiled, still an egg, and that's where we are with Brexit. Brexit is Brexit, and the paperwork is attached to it. There would be no agreement where the EU and the UK would agree that not to have the paperwork, because from the EU's point of view, that's one of the benefits of being in the single market. So paperwork's coming, get used to it. S&S decks, I'm going to go into quite a lot of acronyms here, but I've only done this so they fit on the box, literally. S&S decks is safety and security declarations. So aside from actual customs paperwork, there are also border alerts that are required, which are very, very important border alerts. Which is what's known as an exit summary declaration, which notifies the border that you're leaving, and an entry summary declaration that notifies the border that you're arriving. You can have all the customs paperwork in the world lodged, but if you don't have your S&S declaration lodged, you're going nowhere. I have to say, from the EU law point of view, within the Union Customs Code, the responsibility for the entry summary declaration rests with the carrier. Now, this often creates a lot of problems, because it's not the importer's responsibility to lodge the border alert, it is the haulier's responsibility to lodge the border alert, and hardly any hauliers I've spoken to know how to do it, or even that they're responsible for it. So worth keeping that in the back of your mind. TSP, Transitional Simplified Procedure, as I touched on a little bit earlier, is cancelled. If that was part of your plan, it's no longer part of your plan. So we have to move on from that one. It was brought in as a mitigation towards no deal Brexit. It's also completely in breach of WTO most favoured nation rules. So when Brexit had another year to be negotiated, if you like, I keep referring to it as Brexit, even though the government don't, you can't have a situation where we are knowingly breaking all the WTO rules while sitting as the new kid in the WTO saying, welcome to us, please help. So TSP's gone, it's not part of the plan. And also, whenever TSP was created, quite a few importers applied for and were given unsecured deferment accounts for the payment of duty and VAT. If you did that and you have a deferment account which starts with the number 6, that's also cancelled. That is no longer valid and requires a secure deferment account, which is done through the Customs Comprehensive Guarantee process. We can help you with that. It's quite cumbersome, but if you have TSP, throw it in the bin. It's not worth anything. And if you have a deferment account starting with a 6, throw that in the same bin, because that's not worth anything either. It's all good news, this, isn't it? SPS and BCP. Told you it was a world of acronyms. SPS is sanitary and phytosanitary, and BCP is the border control post that controls the presence of that certification. If you are dealing in products of animal origin, dairy and all sorts, and if you're and equally vegetables, fruit and produce and plants, cut flowers and certain plants are covered by this as well, you require an export health certificate or a phytosanitary certificate. Now, the UK had originally said in the no deal mitigation that that wasn't going to be required because we were easing the flow of everything into the UK. Again, in breach of WTO rules, because if we turn around to the EU and say we don't actually require health certificates on your food, then the Americans quite rightly say, why do you want them on ours? Because we equally don't have a deal with you, and why are you favouring them? So again, in breach of WTO, so the UK are now saying, yes, we also require health certificates for inbound products of animal origin. Comes as a bit of a shocker, that one. Tariffs. Where do you start with tariffs? Tariffs are there to protect the domestic supply of a particular product. So the UK will apply tariffs to items that they can either produce or manufacture themselves in order to protect that production and manufacture. Excuse me. The UK recently released their tariff in May, showing some quite high duty rates on an awful lot of products which come in from the EU, which had previously been shown to have a much lower duty rate in the temporary no deal tariff that was launched. I was talking only to somebody this morning about mushrooms, which were free and now are 12%. I'm just going to mute for a second because I have a cough and I don't want to blast your eardrums. All right, back on, clear throat. So tariffs were introduced in May. The UK released a tariff. Everybody panicked because the rates are quite high. The UK has not done much to ease the flow of goods from EU. The most significant thing about the tariff that was released in May is that it was released in May. This is a tariff that doesn't apply until the 1st of January 2021. So why would you release it now? It was also released in the same week where we released our negotiating definitions, if you like, or our negotiating platform with the EU, so how we considered the negotiation to go. Also released draft text. We also released our understanding of the Northern Ireland Protocol, our negotiation base for Japan, our negotiation base for the USA. It's a tactic. It's a tactic as part of the negotiation with the EU. It's also a very good tactic. So whereas before the UK had said we will allow cheeses into the UK, for example, without duty or with a reduced duty because we like your cheese, but the EU weren't playing the same game with us. So they weren't allowing cheddar into France, for example, at a reduced rate. So how do you negotiate your export, the tariffs on your UK exports, if you've already taken away the tariffs on exports from the EU into the UK? The short answer is you can't. So you reintroduce them. So the UK has reintroduced tariffs and health and safety controls, which equally we don't want, and safety and security declarations, which equally we don't want. But the EU have always said they will impose them, and therefore the UK has imposed them back on them as a tit for tat, let's negotiate, we're all on the same page kind of stance. The other thing about that the tariff does is it actually says, look, if you import, if you manufacture this cheese in the EU and you send it to the UK, we're going to apply a duty of 15%. But we don't want to apply that duty of 15%. We want a free trade agreement with the EU where there is no duty on that product coming into the UK. So the tariff, one, sparks that conversation, and secondly shows the EU that if we do that deal for 0% for French cheese coming into the UK, this is the rate of duty that will apply outside of that deal, thereby protecting that deal as well as our own domestic production by virtue of a tariff which is set high. So don't put too much weight in it at the moment. The tariff that's been released in May is actually quite a good piece of work, but it is a means to an end. But be aware of it, because there are duty payments attached to that and so on and so forth. But the likelihood of that being the final tariff is about 75%. It won't be. Probably higher than that, but I'm being generous. Plus, I've got to check my liability insurance for giving you wrong advice. DDP and ex-works. I'm going to cover this in big detail because, bearing in mind, this is particularly a platform looking at supplies for Aldi. It's equally for pretty much any retailer in the UK, particularly when you're moving delivered duty paid. And I'm going to concentrate on that rather than ex-works, and also consignment stock movements, which of course most UK retail is. So we had a lot of conversations with the retailers in the early stages about what they're going to do about Brexit, and in most cases our conclusion was it's got nothing to do with them because they're not the importer. So if you take Aldi as a good example, when the product is shipped from Germany to the UK to be held at Oakland, for example, Aldi hadn't ordered them when they crossed the border, because they will only order them when the stock is available. I mean, you're moving the stock to the UK in order to facilitate a day one for day two, but Aldi haven't ordered it until it's in the UK. So at the time it crossed the border, the retailer hadn't ordered it, you're the importer. Let's see what that looks like. Before we do that, I'm just going to touch on Northern Ireland. Within this, and I'm getting a lot of calls at the moment because Aldi has sparked this off about the Ireland situation. And we're talking about bonded warehousing, cross-docking in Calais, blah, 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 blah. Let's just quickly cover the Ireland piece. Northern Ireland is the agreement that's come about with the Northern Ireland Protocol is that Northern Ireland are part of the UK customs territory, but are working to the EU customs code. It's the first time it's ever been done, to be fair. What that means is that basically there's a border between GB and Northern Ireland. If goods are going from GB into Northern Ireland, they require an import entry in Northern Ireland, even though they came from Manchester. Okay. They also potentially require export health certificate from Manchester to Belfast, because we're essentially moving into a different customs territory. The other one we get a lot of questions on, I'm going to cover this here, although I'm conscious we're only on slide 3, but don't worry, this is a long slide. Excuse me. If you have product coming from, say, Germany, and some of that product is for Ireland, and the tariffs now look to be very high, you have a situation where you might have 33 pallets come from Germany into the UK, and they're customs cleared in the UK, and duty is paid on all 33 pallets because they're for the UK. And then 3 of those pallets end up in Dublin. The duty in the UK has been wasted. Now, we're working on ways to mitigate that at the moment. One of the ways is that the duty isn't there at all because the EU and the UK come up with a deal. So that has an influence on the solution we provide, because whatever solution we provide has got to be at a point when the investment cannot be a waste of time. You don't invest heavily into a solution which we actually don't know if it's required. It's only required if UK imposes a duty on that product and you end up wasting that duty payment by paying it in the UK and then actually exporting it from the UK to the EU. So we're working on it. The options are that you put everything into bond, and we think that's probably the best one. We've always gone against that because we've said it would incur massive charges on customs clearance processing, but we're going to show you in this presentation where that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. What our issue is that when the 33 pallets leave Germany, do you know what element at that time, do you know what element of those are destined for Ireland? I have to say, in most cases, people tell me, no, they don't. If you do know, then that they can be sent directly to Ireland on a transit document on the same truck, and we would literally cross-dock them in the UK onto a truck destined for Dublin. If you don't know, and in most cases people don't know, then a bonded warehouse comes into play. If you do know, and I can see somebody on my list here of who's attending that definitely has direct into Ireland because of the volumes are quite high, then send it directly to Ireland. And also, when I say directly, I mean miss out the UK, because even if you transit from Germany to Ireland, under the EU rules, you require a health certificate. You require a health certificate to re-enter Ireland because you've passed through a non-EU territory and something bad might have happened to the product en route. So there are options. We're working on all of them. There is not one size fits all, and a lot of it is based on what the duty rate will be. There's a tipping point between the duty that could have been wasted and the costs that are incurred to mitigate wasting that duty. Until you know what the duty is, don't know whether it's a good deal. And we don't know what the duty is till about Q4. Everyone keeping up so far? Let's talk about Incoterms. Possibly the most complicated part of the whole piece because nobody's familiar with them. They exist in worldwide trade all the time, and everybody, in EU trade it's hardly ever talked about. Products either delivered or collected. It's simple, really. There's not much complication involved. When you start layering in the complication, that's when Incoterms define who's responsible for what, and they also, in some cases, have an impact on the customs declaration itself. Should point out that Incoterms are international commercial terms. So they are they're nothing to do with customs. They're not customs terms, but whatever agreement you reach between supplier and buyer, whatever those Incoterms are, will influence how the customs paperwork is handled. So in some ways, if you want to change how the customs paperwork is handled, change the agreement, not the paperwork. Okay. So let's run through what we consider to be the pitfalls, and I'm going to concentrate mostly on delivered duty paid, which in fairness isn't particularly the case on Aldi. In fact, it's not the case on Aldi. What is more likely on Aldi is consignment stock, where the movement of goods come from, say, Germany to the UK. It's a movement of stock in the hope that Aldi will order it, basically, just to make it nice and simple, so that the stock is being moved to the UK. At the point it crossed the border into the UK, they are still your goods. Therefore, you are the importer. So DDP or consignment stock has a situation where the exporter is magically also the importer. Okay. So let's look at what that looks like. We've done this on a video before, but I'm going to use this opportunity to go through this. The video had a lot of hits on it because it's a subject which is quite complicated, and we think we've explained it pretty well. So you're a seller, you're based in the EU, you have a buyer in the UK, Tesco, Aldi, whoever, it doesn't matter. You have a buyer in the UK. In order to make, oh, sorry, I've lost my screen. I just lost my screen for a few seconds. I'm not sure whether you lost it too. Sorry. Bear with me 2 seconds, just as I was getting to the good bit. Sorry, bear with me. Talk amongst yourselves for a moment. Right, you should now see seller and buyer again. Sorry, my screen disappeared for some stupid reason. So you are a seller in the EU and there is a buyer in the UK. You sell the goods on a DDP basis. It's the same with consignment stock. So what you want to do is you want to make life easy. In some cases, you're not necessarily supplying on a delivered duty paid basis, DDP, but you're supplying on a delivered basis. But that's easy to say when there isn't any duty. So if today, for example, you supply goods to the UK on a delivered price, and you actually say, well, look, we're going to continue to do that, but we're not DDP, we're not delivered duty paid. Well, look, it's easy to say that there is no duty today. If I were to introduce duty, who's paying it? Are you paying it as the supplier, or is your customer willing to pay it? If you're paying it, which is often the case, because your customer still wants to buy, but he don't want to pay the extra price, or he wants it part of a negotiation, then it automatically falls into DDP. So it's very, very easy to fall into the delivered duty paid hole. This is what it looks like. So I deliver duty paid to my UK customer. My UK customer buys delivered duty paid, and he loves me for it. Everything's nice and straightforward. Duty's been included. I've now worked that into a case rate, and I've agreed a slightly higher commission or case rate, or however you calculate your pricing. However, your buyer is not the importer, you are. And in order to be the importer, you need to have either a legal entity in the UK, if you already have that. If you don't have that already, then you need to create a virtual identity in the UK, which at the very least requires a UK EORI number. I'm assuming you all know what EORI is. It's the unique identifier to customs. So at the very, very least, you need a unique EORI number, which starts GB0. But much better practice is that you also VAT register in the UK, and you have an EORI number attached to your UK registration. To register in the UK, you do not need to be a UK company, but you do need a UK VAT agent who's approved. We are that. You don't need to have a fiscal representative, which you have to have in many European countries. In the UK, you don't need that. The UK VAT agent is sufficient. However, your customs broker, us, needs to act on your behalf as an indirect representative. The reason for that is that we become jointly and severally liable for the customs debt on entries done in your name. The reason for that is that the import declaration is being established in the UK and you're not. Therefore, if customs have any issues with any misdeclaration on that customs entry, they're going to come to the guy in the UK. So we have to act as an indirect representative. I mentioned earlier on that there is a shortage of customs agents. There is. In the press in the UK, it's saying that we require another 50,000 customs agents, and there's not many of them appearing so far, which is fine. you can count on one finger the ones who are willing to act on an indirect representative basis. And particularly when you look at a market with 200 million new pieces of business required, the low-hanging fruit is where you actually represent the importer as a direct representative without liability. So the opportunity to find somebody who will act as an indirect rep is really hen's teeth stuff. We're willing to do it if you work with us in a certain way. So you have to supply your actual self to your UK virtual self, and only when you've supplied to your UK virtual self and the customs formalities have been completed, can you now supply to your UK buyer as and when they order the goods. When you do supply your UK buyer, unlike today where you would invoice them from, say, Germany, quoting the buyer's VAT number and reverse charge the VAT, none of that exists because there is no centralized VAT in Brexit. So you can still invoice from Germany, for example. It would still be your German address, but rather than quoting, for example, Aldi's VAT number as a reverse charge, you are quoting your GB VAT number and charging VAT if VAT is applicable on the goods. Just for the avoidance of doubt, because I know we have some Europeans on here, there is no VAT on food products in the UK. I make that point because in the UK, there isn't any VAT on food, and we therefore think that there isn't any VAT on food in the rest of Europe. There is. It's only the UK, Ireland and Malta who have zero rated VAT on food. Hence the reason why there's still paperwork. So whereas before when you sent the goods from Germany to the UK, it was a reverse charge VAT transaction where you quoted the UK buyer's VAT number and that's how you accounted for the VAT. You can't do that. Now you actually have an export from Germany, for example, which is zero rated for VAT, and you then import it into the UK and you positive rate it for VAT. It just so happens on food that the rate is zero. It's a very good point, that actually. There is no, the goods are not free from VAT. Everything is VATable. It's just the rate happens to be zero. Okay, but it still has all the VAT controls. Keeping up with Incoterms. That's Incoterms done. So if you are DDP or your consignment stock, at the very least, you require a UK EORI number starting GB0. Much better practice is a UK VAT number and a UK EORI number attached to that, and we can look after that for you as a VAT agent. Now I want to look at the process. Goods are on the move. How are we going to make things move? We've shown this graphic, which is actually simplified, but it just shows that there are a lot of moving parts. This is like the fidget spinner kind of thing. There are a lot of pieces that have to move in a particular order. If we look at today, the movement of goods from A to B is actually, from factory to storage in the UK, is the physical movement of goods. It's not particularly complicated. It's no more onerous than moving the goods from say Manchester to Birmingham. The only complication is that there's a ferry or Eurotunnel between the two. But other than that, not particularly tricky. It's an internal movement. Not when Brexit comes along. When you start putting those processes in place, the risk is that the export and the import processes, of which there are many, could have the effect of stopping and starting the movement of that truck from A to B. You end up with multiple elements that are involved with different parties looking after those elements. That also means that there's an increased process management going on, and that therefore has the potential for delays and costs. Now, we've actually had some retailers look at us where we're not necessarily involved with the customs paperwork because everyone's got bits going on, but they recognise that they require a control tower function that sits across the top and just makes sure everything's in order. Yeah, you can't have an airport without air traffic control, basically. And the risk here is that if you don't control that piece, you have an airport and everyone just lands when they see a gap. Well, that won't work. So we've got to look at things a different way. Also, when you look at the functions as stop, start, and all of the elements as single components, you can quickly rack up quite a lot of costs. We've drawn this table to actually show what are the elements that are involved from moving the goods from the production through to storage in the UK. But we haven't even supplied the retailer yet. We've just got it from one warehouse to another warehouse at this point. The table shows what all of those elements are, who we think is responsible for those elements, and if they're purchased individually, what that could cost. the things like the UK import entry at £45, for example. You can get lower rates, but not for indirect rep. You can't. I've seen rates for an indirect rep at £125 for an entry. So bear in mind, when you're negotiating, if you're out there trying to market test the rates, make sure you mention it's an indirect representative. If it is, it's not always the case, but if it is. There's then, of course, the safety and security declaration. Someone's got to pay for that. There's the IPAS declaration in the UK, which I've mentioned the other day at £15. I think somebody picked up on. Look, all of this is just, these are the market rates we think are going to be out there. We've got a bit of a different approach. We think the weakness in this piece is the truck, because everything else is fairly controllable. And whereas the truck today is just a transporter with the means of moving the goods from A to B, we've now got complexities put in place. It's no longer the physical movement of goods or simply the physical movement of goods. We've now moved into what we lovingly call the fiscal movement of goods. And we love the fact that it crosses between fiscal and physical. Why is it fiscal? Because you're going through borders, you're going through different tax regimes, and you need to control that piece. And is your haulier up to the task? I don't know is the answer in a lot of cases, because they haven't had to be. They haven't needed to be. We've seen an awful lot of growth of Eastern European trucking in the UK as Europe got bigger and bigger and bigger. But it was an easy market. It was low hanging fruit, because a truck from A to B, well, I could do that, and I can do it cheaper than you, and I've got new trucks, and I give a good service, I get the business. Suddenly now, when you layer in the complexities, as Warren Buffett once said, you only find out who's swimming in the nude when the tide goes out. And I think it's a very good way of looking at things. When the process changes, it's only then that you find out who is able to handle the process. So the way we've looked at it is that with the fiscal sort of control across the piece, we're giving you the opportunity to have a single point of contact from the moment you've got the goods ready for export. So you generate the export, and we'll do the rest and pull the goods to us, controlling all of the aspects on the way. Why have we done that? Well, because we've shown there's an awful lot of money available, and we'd like all of that money, please. Wouldn't that be simple if that was the answer? We've done it in a different way. One is it allows the truck to keep moving whilst we're running processes concurrently in the background. And secondly, because we can control it, believe it or not, the processes that are required are easier if you're in control. So we've actually looked at it and said, on the same table that we've shown before, bearing in mind you will get a copy of this at the end, so you don't have to be frantically writing anything. Where we've said, look, £25 here, £15 here, £45 here, we've said, look, from your back door to arrival at UK storage, hopefully Oakland, if we're controlling all aspects of that, we've got it down to around £1.50 per pallet across the piece. No matter how many pallets it is, £1.50 per pallet. Obviously, you've got to put 150 pallets in the truck. No, it's not the case. We've taken a sort of average load and said, look, we want to give you the opportunity to have pricing which is consistent with how you operate. So it's no good having these sort of fixed costs against the movement of the truck. Ideally, we'd like to get it down to a case rate, but of course, the number of cases on a pallet are variable. So the best common denominator we can find is the pallet itself, and we've got that down to £1.50 per pallet if we're controlling it. Because if we're not controlling it, we can't drive the efficiencies into it that make that rate possible. So, and there's another part I want to cover is that a lot of people say to me, well, it's customs paperwork, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. It is customs paperwork, but believe it or not, when you know how to do it, that's the easy bit. The hard thing is about the sequencing and the process management that allows you to get from A to B. We've done a lot of training with new recruits. We put them through some very, very good training in the UK from the newly formed UK Customs Academy. They're all at level 4. I mean, I'm 40 years at this, and I'm level 5. So you can see that the training is a good level. Well, assuming I'm good at anything, but they still can't get a truck through the border. They wouldn't know where to start. All they know is all the intricacies of the tax processes. It's not about that. It's about managing the sequencing. What's the process at Calais? What's the process at Zeebrugge? What do you have to do at Europort, which you don't have to do at Caen, let's say? There are different processes, and unfortunately they vary quite a lot. And there are quite a few of them. So we've kind of highlighted the main ones. And if you get them all in the right order, all in the right shape, it is like a graphic equalizer. If you move it around, you get the sound you want. If too many people are moving it, you don't get the sound you want. And in fact, you don't get anything that you were setting out to do. So once you've actually set out to say, this is what I want, this is the shape I need, and then you control that shape. So looking at the processes that run along the bottom, we're going to walk you through the movement. We can't do this bit, you're the production. So you produce your product in your member state of the EU. You decide or you receive an order for export. Either that's you moving stock or you've actually received an order to go through. There's no truck yet, and I don't want a truck yet because we don't need truck numbers on a lot of this paperwork. At that point, you're raising the export declaration in order to put the goods under export customs control, which actually means you can zero rate them for VAT. So you can't zero rate them for VAT if it isn't an export, so you put them under export control and then you zero rate them. At the same time, you have to put an entry into traces NT, because if you're moving goods that are controlled by SPS, sanitary, phytosanitary, export health certificate, products of animal origin, all of those kind of things. If they are controlled goods, then they have to be entered on traces. We can do traces for you remotely if you need help. And as somebody asked me the other day, could we actually do a simple guide for that? Yes, we can. We've lodged the traces NT user guide on our website. It's 82 pages. So yeah, I get the point. We need a slightly abridged version. We didn't write it, came from the EU, but we need to do a punchier version. So you've received an export. There's no truck or anything here now. You've decided you're going to send 33 pallets to the UK. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to put them under customs control, and you're also going to put them under phytosanitary control or SPS controls. Only at that point is the truck on its way to you, and now you load the truck. Don't waste your time loading the truck if you haven't done the export paperwork, because it isn't an export. It's just a hobby of loading trucks. Okay. Once the truck is ready to go, the documents and the data need to flow. So the MRN number for the export needs to be given to the driver, and the original of the export health certificate needs to be given to the driver. At that point, we're saying, send us the data so that we can pick it up from there. And that includes us running all of the other processes. I have to keep clicking here because my screen's gone a bit funny. The truck's now on its way and winging its way towards Calais. At least we hope it's Calais, because that's what we think he's going to do. But this is why we think the truck is a bit of a loose cannon in this. Like, we think he's going to Calais. What if it isn't Calais? This is now midnight and I don't know where that truck is. And I'm busily firing information off to Calais and he's not in Calais. What has to happen at the port is we have to lodge the MRNs in an electronic record for that truck at the port. It's known as the logistics envelope, and we have to put those in at the port so that as the vehicle comes towards the port, the ANPR cameras pick him up. The real risk here is that literally we're firing them all over here and the truck goes over there. And without controlling the truck, it becomes a waste of energy and time and a potential for a delay. At the same time that the logistics envelope is being loaded, we also have to do the UK import pre-declaration. It's not the final customs entry because the goods are not yet in the UK, but the customs entry has to be pre-lodged. That gives us an entry number, known as an ENO, and that also has to be lodged on the logistics envelope. This is why I think the truck's a bit of a loose cannon in this, because as much as the haulier might have said we haven't subcontracted it, but he probably has. And now we just don't know where this truck is. We've lost a bit of control over him. Normally when you load him, the next you see is he arrives. Somewhere in between, some magic happens, but we need to be more in control of that magic. Okay. Where have we got to? Are there additional controls over and above the customs entry? So we've also got to do the ENS, which is an acronym for the entry summary declaration, which is the safety and security declaration. And on certain products of food and feed, we also have to do what's known as an IPAFS declaration in the UK, which is the UK version of Traces NT. It's quite an interesting one, actually. This came up yesterday, where the UK have said we will lose access to traces when we leave the EU. I don't think that's true, if I'm honest, because there are 70 countries working on traces and there aren't 70 members of the EU. So it's not a prerequisite that you have to be a member of the EU. Being slightly cynical about this, it's the UK saying we don't want to be on traces because we don't want the EU to have visibility of what we're bringing in. We're back to the chlorinated American chicken at this point. We don't want the EU to see it. That's my cynical side. Okay, but there are declarations. We've got to do the UK import entry, the border alert, the safety and security declaration, and the IPAFs, which is the DEFRA alert to say that we've got products for human consumption on the move. Okay, makes sense? All of this, as well as the logistics envelope. See the sequencing, how important this is becoming? If the truck doesn't go where we think it's going to go, none of this goes the right way. Where are we? At the port yet? Oh, we've arrived in Calais. We've arrived in Calais. The system in Calais actually works on the basis that the ANPR cameras will pick up the truck details and will retrieve the contents of the logistics envelope. So if the logistics envelope doesn't exist, or it's lodged at the wrong port, which is our fear, if it doesn't exist, you won't be allowed in the port. So if that logistics record, if the ANPR camera looks at truck number 123, goes to the electronic system for the envelope for 123, and there isn't one, the barrier will not move until there is a record for 123. So the truck will be recirculated and sent back. It's a big point. It's got to happen. If it's not in the logistics envelope, it's not coming in the port. From the exporter's point of view, whether that's your supplier or whether you are the exporter and the DDP importer or the consignment stock importer, at that point, the logistics envelope opens the MRNs, records that there's an export taking place, and that closes the MRNs and sends the electronic message back to the exporter to say the export has taken place, thereby closing your VAT liability. Remember that you zero rated it for export. Here's the proof that it exported. The system's actually quite simple. If you turn up in Calais, you can only go to the UK, so you're heading for the UK because you're an export. Well, if you haven't got your export paperwork, guess what? You're not an export, and you're not an export until your paperwork's done, until everything's lodged. There's no veterinary controls in Calais. There's no border inspection posts or anything like that because you're leaving the EU. Okay, so there's nothing more to do there. But you will not be allowed in the port of Calais unless your logistics envelope is correct and lodged. Once you're in the port, you can't leave the port and get on a boat unless your UK declaration is lodged. There is no space to customs clear in the UK. Dover doesn't have the space, and Eurotunnel was never built that way. In fact, Eurotunnel started commercial services in 1994 and the borders came down in 1993. So Eurotunnel wasn't built for borders. So it certainly doesn't have anywhere to hold trucks while they customs clear. So the rule is you can't set off unless you can leave. Okay, so you're not allowed to enter Dover unless you can leave Dover. And that's where the entry details again have to be on that logistics envelope. That again is a fear. So let's say, for example, the truck isn't under our control, or we're not doing the control tower piece on this, and the haulier is super organized and he's done the logistics envelope in Calais. Now we've got an import entry and we want to put it in the logistics envelope. What's the chances of us finding the same logistics envelope he created? Probably nil. So we're going to end up with one or two logistics envelopes knocking around for that truck. And when the ANPR camera sees it, he's probably only going to retrieve one. So suddenly we've got sequencing out of balance, and sequencing out of balance equals holes, holes equals delays. So if your MRN's lodged, you're allowed in Calais. If your entry's lodged, you're allowed on the boat. And at this point, actually, you're pretty done. You're now en route. I'm not being very respectful to Eurotunnel where I used to work, but you could equally use Eurotunnel, obviously. But on this, the graphic's much better for a boat. You now arrive in the UK. There will be, according to our current stance, there will be a UK vet check, which will require a seal check on the vehicle if it's sealed, or if not, a cursory look at the load, or a complete turnout if there's something they don't like the look of. And they will want to check the original phytosanitary or the original export health certificate, if this ever happens. Okay, this, bearing in mind, I don't think this will happen. This is just a tactic by the UK. The location, we deliberately put a map and an identifier on it, is they're not building these at the moment, and there's a good argument that says if that veterinary control has to take place, rather than build a premises where it can take place, the goods are already going to a registered food business in someone, for example, like Oakland. So let's do the check there. Why waste the time with the truck when the goods are coming into storage for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days? Do the check then, and then we just move it from pre-check to check and ready to dispatch. So it's under negotiation. The main thing to say at the moment is nobody's building a border inspection post. So it is a bit of smoke and mirrors from the UK at the moment. That said, it could still happen. Once you're into the UK, bearing in mind you weren't allowed to go to the UK unless you were clear to leave. So you're not allowed to enter Dover unless your path is clear. So once you come into the UK, you drive straight onto the motorway and you progress onto. We're using Oakland this for obvious reasons. So you move on to Oakland, where the customs clearance will be finalised. Truck's unimportant here. Truck is just being unloaded because it's the premises that are approved, and the import declaration is being finalised in one of two ways. If the goods are solely for the UK, the import entry is finished and the duty is calculated, and the duty is now taken either from your account with customs or from our account with customs, in which case we would have an agreed commercial arrangement with you where you'd have to lodge money with us in advance, because the duty can soon mount up. So we would have a duty account with you, rather like you would have a client account at a solicitor's, where we would just that money would just be used for the payment of duty and constantly replenished. If you have your own duty deferment account in the UK, which normally requires you having a UK bank account, then we would use your account, and we wouldn't have to manage that process or incur those different admin. So, but once the goods are arrived in Oakland, if they're for the UK market, the entry's finalised, the duty's taken, and the goods are now what's known as in free circulation in the UK. If they eventually go on to Ireland, you've wasted that duty. The other option is, if the product isn't going to Ireland, and you know it isn't going to Ireland because it's only being listed in UK supermarkets, then it can be duty paid. If there's a possibility it's going to go to Ireland, we put the whole thing into bond, so nothing's cleared. And instead of clearing the goods on arrival at the warehouse, we would put them under bond and clear them as they leave the warehouse. And obviously the declaration we would do would be dependent on the ultimate destination of those goods. God, I could talk for England. 45 minutes in and I'm not taking a beat. Sorry, I'm just complimenting myself there for a minute. We're nearly there. Stick with it, folks. Once the stock, this is now we're saying that the stock is controlled in the normal way we would control the stock, with best before dates and quality management and so on and so forth. I'm really simplifying that process because I'm the customs guy. The stock is now held and the retailer order comes in. If the goods were duty paid in the UK, we're already at the same situation we're at today. So again, it was still this £1.50 a pallet has now got everything into the UK, all customs processes, excluding duty, I have to say. We're not paying, we're not, the duty is the duty, that has to be paid, and it's a disbursement which we will handle for you. So if it's duty paid, the goods just flow like they do today. If it isn't duty paid because it was under bond, then we go through the bond layer, and we're actually now saying, depending on which retailer destination has ordered those goods, we either turn them into UK and pay the duty, or we raise a document which moves them on to Ireland without the payment of UK duty. Makes sense? Makes sense to me, but I'm 40 years at this. And then your products. Sorry, not very respectful. The products are then loaded to the truck and delivered to the RDC as today. It just goes through a different customs process layer. Now, going back to those processes, and we're nearly there. Going back to those processes that we said before, if you deal with them individually, they do have, they can look individually quite reasonably priced, but when you start to match them together, you can soon get to a situation where the import declaration on its own is about £45. Then the IPAS declaration, I've got to do a bit of traces, I've got to hop, skip and jump over here. You want me to put it on the logistics envelope? That's more money. You want me to do a safety and security declaration? That's more money. Look, you might not be exposed to this fee, but somebody will be. And if they're being exposed to this fee somewhere along the line, you might well end up being exposed to this fee. We've decided just to take a view on all of this and look at it completely differently and say, or you can just do all of that from the point of loading the truck to UK to the point when they're free to leave the warehouse in the UK, £1.50 per pallet. Sounds simple, doesn't it? One of the reasons why we do that is today our involvement is when you arrive at Oakland. And that's fine in a physical, the reason being is it's so easy to get them to Oakland. Is you book a truck, they arrive in Oakland. When you layer in that complexity, then the management that we're doing in Oakland, why don't we just push that all the way back to your factory gate? So now suddenly the management process starts the moment the truck is loaded, and we control all of that into the bonded warehouse or into the store, depending on whichever agreement we have. So we're changing the connection. So instead of it being we get involved when you arrive, we get involved when you dispatch. Hope that makes sense. Believe it or not, I've come to the end. The other thing I wanted to mention is we've started doing these brunch events. We're not going to do them quite as regularly as it might look, but we did brunch number 1 last week. It went pretty well, I think. We had about 200 people on it and some very, very good comments. It was our first attempt, and somehow we managed to make it work. Spinning plates, people were losing connections, and all kinds of things were going on. And I came away at the end of it thinking, phew, we did it. We didn't. I forgot to press record. So we're basically going to run it again, and rather than just repeat myself, I've actually added in some different layers into that and focusing on Incoterms. You're more than welcome to come along. If you haven't had an invitation to the brunch event next week, then let me know and we'll recirculate that through our mailing list. You should have already had one, but if not, don't worry, we can forward it on again. They are going to become quite regular. They go into a bit more detail about the kind of data we require now. Data is absolutely key to everything right now, so that's where we are. So that invite's out there. And now, if I can open the chat section just to see if anybody's actually got any questions, and hopefully there's not too many. We've got a period of any Q&As you might have. There's always a temptation here to unmute everybody, but it's anarchy when we do. So I can't do that at the moment. We have to use the chat section. Otherwise, suddenly 20 people, and on the brunch thing, 200 people suddenly go, boom. So if there are any questions, please add them in the chat section. There's none coming up, which either means you're all asleep, you've left this playing in the background, or I am wonderful at explaining this process. The next action, I guess, well, I know, is that we want to look at it to see where we go next. You know, all well and good, I was sitting there saying, look, if we control the truck, we can control the piece, and we can control all the elements of the border and just map that into one movement. So the next thing we want to do is have a discussion with you to say, how are we going to do that? You know, what does that look like? Yeah, does that mean us controlling your existing haulier, or does that mean putting, as lovingly known as a 4PL, a fourth party logistics operator, or does that mean us putting in alternative hauliers or giving you the option for alternative hauliers? The answer to that two-part question is both of those. We're open to all of this. We're not after a quick win. This is a slow burn for us. And if the process means that, look, we just start to control that to get more feel for it, but certainly the job, if we're going to drive efficiencies into this, data and sequencing is key. And if we're controlling the truck, we've got more of a handle on the data and sequencing. Right, I'm going to stop talking, but there are some questions coming in. So, good. We've got 5 minutes. Many thanks, Rob. You're wonderful. Don't you look like George Clooney? Yeah, no, I made that one up. Where do I sign? I like it. Okay, I've obviously explained it well. Sign us up was another one. Right, do I need a health certificate for iPads? Or does EU vet email you details? You don't know. You don't need a separate certificate for iPaths. Consider iPaths as being a replacement for traces. Normally, you've got an export health certificate and a traces electronic record that says that the goods are loaded here, been checked by this vet, gone through this border inspection post, arrived here, and ended up there. And that's what traces does. From the UK's point of view, we're just taking that bit off and replacing it with iPaths. So the certificates are still running as normal. There's no additional paperwork required. It's just the electronic process is, if anything, a bit duplicated, because this traces record's now just going to fall off a cliff because it can't finalise, and the UK's replaced it with something else. Slow down with your questions, folks. For EU-produced goods of products of animal origin, will a second UK vet cert be required? Will a second UK vet cert be required? Sorry, I've lost it myself. Will a second UK vet cert be required to be issued for POA exported back to the EU? Yes. Yes, good point. If you bring goods into the UK and you break the movement, and I mean properly break the movement, like off truck into store, then from a vet's point of view, anything could have happened to those goods. Therefore, when you now move them back into the EU, for example, Ireland, yes, you require an export health certificate from the UK. We're hoping this will soften because it's bloody awful at the moment. There are points when you spend most of your life going through border inspection posts, and that can't be the case. But yes, anything, and that includes transit, I have to say. So even goods on transit, if you're breaking the transit and the movements come from the EU through the UK, I mean, full truck. In fact, actually, no, full truck leaving the EU, transiting through the UK, no intention of stopping in the UK, lands back at the EU border at Dublin, health cert from Germany or from the original loading point in EU to prove that the goods haven't been infected en route in the UK. This has got to soften, but at the moment, DEFRA are the worst out of all of the government departments, and they've been really slow at acting. Watch this space. We'll try and keep you advised as much as we can on that. Well, we will keep you advised. That's what we do. Would you send the MRN detail? We would send you MRN details and you control the rest. Doable. Look, there's a control tower piece. What's clear in this is there is a control tower piece involved. And in fact, Sarah, you're absolutely bang on. That's what we're suggesting, really, is even if you are a sausage producer in Germany, I mean, that's been very stereotypical, but a sausage producer in Germany who now has an export, you've got to put them under export control. You've now got to create an MRN, the movement reference number, which puts them under customs control. We want to be saying, here's a truck, we'll collect 33 pallets, what's the MRN number, and can I have the export health certificate, please? If you look at me like I've got three heads and you're looking at me saying, what is the MRN number? Then we're not ready, you're not ready for the truck because the goods are not ready to export. Can the logistics envelope, can it be done remotely from Calais? Yes, it can. All of this is remote, to be fair, but all of this is electronic apart from two documents. One is the export health certificate, stroke phytosanitary certificate, must be original. And the other one is a transit document. If there is a transit document involved that has a barcode on it that has to get scanned as it passes borders, that also must be an original. They're the only two documents. So, but a straightforward load, which is, say, coming from Germany to the UK, doesn't require any transit, and we'd only have original health certs if they are eventually required. That creates a bit of a challenge on the Irish Sea, I have to say, because a lot of Irish Sea movements can quite often be, Irish Sea can quite often be unaccompanied trailers, and transporters are now attaching secure tubes to trailers so that they can put original documents in it because the ferry company don't want to take responsibility. You would manage the IPAFs. Yeah, we can manage IPAFs. I have to say we've not covered it particularly here. A lot of these processes are fairly onerous, can be quite heavy. But what we've done, or what we're working on in the background and what we cover more in the brunch sections, is the automation which we're piling into this. Look, I have the ability to do customs declarations, but why the hell would I want to do customs declarations? At a push, I could do 100 in a day, but that's the most I could do, and that's not making good use of 40 years of experience. Instead of that, we're actually taking the common denominator line through all of the processes, working really hard on the data that sits in the background, and then we've got Robbie the robot, who you would meet in the presentation, which is sitting there automating most of it, because we can handle far more, far quicker, or far more quickly than we could do in a manual process. Our biggest issue is when the transition period finishes, Brexit is bang on. There is no phasing in. There's the potential for this kind of overlap, but it's not there yet. So this is a 0 to 60 in 4 seconds kind of motion. And we can't be sitting there saying, well, if this goes well, we'll bring some more people in, because where are the trucks going to go during that period? So we've got to hit the ground running, and that's what we're basing everything on. £1.50 a pallet applies to UK EU flow. Potentially, yeah, unless there's a transit document. Yeah, potentially. If we're controlling it, then £1.50 per pallet. Could that relate to a UK EU flow? Yes, but I would struggle with the European customs clearance included in that price, because I'm not personally doing it. We're using sub-agents, and I can't tell them. I can negotiate all day long with them, but I can't dictate to them. I've tried, it didn't work. So look, potentially, yes. The main message we're getting out here is really control is key, and simplicity. Brexit adds layer upon layer of administration, so the last thing we want to do is add any more. Okay, let's see if we can reduce most of it. Do you have warehouse capacity that can take more than one supplier? This looks like a prerequisite for this service. Do you have the warehouse capacity to take on more suppliers, as this looks like a... Yeah, look, this is... Yes, that's not my department. That's Sean and Lee's department, really, who I think are on here, but I've lost them in my piece. Yes, look, if there is an opportunity for more business, that's always there. Let me just have a quick look here and see if I can find him. Might be falling over on the tech here a little bit. Sorry, 2 seconds. No, can't see. No, look, we'll follow up on that, but look, the more the merrier. We've got a lot of expansion going on within the business at the moment, and if Brexit is a volume model, and the more once you've got the actual shape of it, you just keep feeding into the volume. What do you recommend if you're going to deliver from Germany to Ireland? As the beginning, you said you would recommend the delivery directly to Ireland, but in your chart it looks like there's a possibility. Look, both really. If you know what's leaving Germany and going to Ireland, you have the option of sending it directly to Ireland. If that option is costly, and it's likely to be, then we can equally put it through bonded warehousing in the UK, and we could just hold it in bond. Look, until we devise this simplified system, I would have said that wasn't cost effective, because there would have been import entries all the time for bond exits. But because we're controlling all of the elements, including the customs piece, we've taken a view across that and just said, look, it's a pallet rate, so it's £1.50 a pallet. So before I was worried that you put 30 pallets into bond and you take 5 pallets out 6 times, and that's £6.45. But we've taken a view on that and said it's £1.50 across the piece. So suddenly bonded warehouse gets a bit more sexy, a bit more of an option. And because I don't think the other option is such a good one of direct, unless you've got sizable volumes where a direct service to Ireland and a second stock holding in Ireland is viable. So, but we can talk about that separately if you like. I know we already communicate with each other on that registration, for example. I'm not trying to give away anybody's names here, but we do. Will IPAF's entries be required as from the first? As I'd say yes. I mean, it's not nailed down, but I would say yes. I mean, I know in the early stages IPAFs was introduced and then it kind of fell apart. But right now I would say yes, they are required, or assume that they would. So we're bang on our time, I think. Unless I can find Sean on my list, which I can't seem to find for some reason, but then I might be doing something pretty wrong. Then somebody's wiping their way through my presentation at the moment, so I'm just going to kill that off, take back control. So I'm going to love you and leave you. We've got all of your information on through the invite, so we'll follow up with it and send you across a recording of this. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, even though I may have got in the way of it. Thank you. If I could get my screen back, would be nice. Oh, give me back my screen. Somebody's taking control of my screen.